Let's go!
Street Fighter 6 costumes. Oh boy, damn, that's a conversation. Let's just get into it. I know you guys have heard this a billion times. I'll try to offer somewhat of a more nuanced take than every single other person, but I'm gonna be honest, they're right. I did make a tweet about it. Here's what I said. Most logical outcome from the Street Fighter 6 costume fiasco is that the World Tour Battle Pass items actually sell. They might sell better than the costumes or the costume 3s maybe from a year ago. The custom character outfits are also not particularly cheap. All the freak outfits that you can use in Hub and in World Tour, because that shit requires a shit ton of QA. And Harada specifically talked about this, that if there's one thing he wished he could get rid of Tekken is character customization, because it's a nightmare and it requires so much Q&A. He had a podcast talking about it. So yes, like it's the same exact shit in Street Fighter 6. Like their freak costumes, you have to make work on a ton of different movesets with a ton of different characters and a ton of different sizes and all this bullshit, right? So it requires a lot of QA. Capcom likely doesn't have that many resources available for DLC and other games in development. So let's talk about this. Street Fighter 6 as a game is relatively content devoid in its existence, where the things that are happening to the game are happening, but the impact those things have specifically on like online ranked matches, online player matches are actually relatively minor, because the only thing outside of balance changes and new characters eventually being added every few months has been a costume pack over a year ago. That was about it, and nothing else has really severely changed things. But maybe if we look back at the Street Fighter YouTube page, that might not entirely be true, but I'll agree. I think that there's been a lot of content added to the game that is not directly associated with like you playing online player matches and this can change your shit. You're not wrong. But at the same time, there is a lot of content added to the game that's appealing towards another side of the audience that never really existed before, and that is a Battle Hub audience, much less that World Tour audience. I don't know the exact, I don't think we're ever gonna know the numbers of like which costumes ultimately sell more, which ones are easier to produce, and because there's been like one of these things a month practically, that these battle passes that seemingly nobody gives a shit about, somebody does give a shit about elsewhere. And they are having an impact, and it is actually benefiting Street Fighter 6. It's just not for us. Feels like those things are made for the people that are just going to play the game, right? Again, as a reminder, my experience with Street Fighter 6 almost is exclusively in online ranked matches, dude. My bitch ass, and I haven't played a lot in a while because obviously ever since Tekken came out, you know, a bit Tekken-y. I tried World Tour and it's not bad. It's good, but I am definitely one of those people that put almost exclusively 500 hours into this game, into playing online. Almost, that's it. 500 hours in the first 6 months of the game just playing online, because the online was so good and I was enjoying the game so much that I pretty much just did that. With that being said, Street Fighter 6 is 100% sort of emulating kind of like classic fighting game updates. It's a lot closer to the effect that you would have seen in Street Fighter 4, if not maybe Street Fighter 5. The content that we're getting, to a certain degree, is paced out to the normal like seasonal model, and you get stuff within the seasonal model, and that's about it. But the space between the stuff in the models is much bigger now. I think that mostly comes down to a quality issue. We saw the fact that Street Fighter devs take this stuff pretty seriously, and that even an approximate costume can take months. Just a new cosmetic costume for a character can take a long goddamn time. So Capcom's obsession with quality, and obviously the characters are way more detailed and have way more elements to them than something like Street Fighter 5 and Street Fighter 4. It's just going to take longer to produce. The other thing is that I heard interesting metrics around the games industry. I think this came from also Arxis. When you have a game that's in main development, it's all hands on deck. The entirety of your staff is effectively working to produce product, get it out, and it sells. Once that thing is done, there is a separate team made of people that were individuals responsible for the initial creation of the game in some way, where they make a DLC team, pretty much a post-launch team that will support the game, if not make content for months and years and all this stuff going forward. However, the size of that team can be anywhere between like a 15 to 25%, and it really depends on the game and the developer. But say, for example, 500 people worked to produce, like, you know, production, freelance, all that kind of stuff, Street Fighter 6, you might have a squad of like less than 75 folks that are working on this shit from this point forward. And that's a lot less, dude. Like that is just in general, like these smaller respective like skeleton crews that are just trying their best to produce this stuff. Because what happened to the rest of the squad? Well, in the Street Fighter 5 time frame, people are wanting the content distribution that Street Fighter 5 kind of had, and that was just costume after costume after costume. Like stuff was just flying off the shelves. Well, there was a reason for that. And it's because Street Fighter 5 tanked and they didn't make money off of the price of the game. In fact, the game bombed in the first year. They found that people were eating up the DLC relatively quick, and as I hear it, like 10 years ago almost, Street Fighter 5 was effectively saved by costume DLC. That it allowed them to budget and freelance more people to get in on the project and effectively turn the game into something much better, which is what happened to it. Because yeah, costumes, no shit, saved Street Fighter 5. They don't need to do that. They produced what is effectively a well-received, competent game that plays good online, that looks good, that is widely considered to be one of the best fighting games out there right now. So Street Fighter 6 sort of nailed it. And an additional crew that would be required is not as much there. It's clear that Capcom has their priorities in different places, that is supporting potentially single-player content, if not online multiplayer customization, and they're going in that direction. Do I want more costumes? Do I want more stuff like that? Sure, I do. But the expectation of Street Fighter 6 is funny to me. And I think this is also the devs' fault. Street Fighter 6 feels like a games as a service. It feels like a thing that wants you to jump in daily and engage with it and do like weeklies and dailies, and get currency to buy shit and do shit and yada yada. It's like, they even started that in Street Fighter 5, right? It really feels like Street Fighter 6 wants you to jump in and get that battle pass and level this shit up and do all that kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, okay, like I see where the game is going, but it's also not. You know, in many ways, it's like the game feels like it wants to be a games as a service, but it does not have the appropriate multiplayer content that really supports that. It almost feels like, in my opinion, the game should have been free. Like at some point, there should have been like a multiplayer component or like a core fighters pack or some shit that would have been free and that would engage people to buy all this extra bullshit, but then they didn't end up going in that direction. Possibly, I have no conclusion if that could have been the case in some way. But Street Fighter 6 isn't that. It is not a games as a service. It's a full-priced game that sort of has a feeling of games as a service, but is not providing the content of a gas. They're not going full bore, and all of a sudden, there's just costumes and content available on the regular that you either have to unlock or pay them for, because they don't need to do that. It reminds me a lot of Monster Hunter, right? In a way. There's obviously more content than Monster Hunter, because in reality, Monster Hunter has a lot of bullshit cosmetics that most people don't give a shit about, just like the battle passes in Street Fighter 6, but maybe some people do. And then eventually they have like a big title update like a year down the line or some stuff. Instead, in Street Fighter, they piecemeal it, and you are given that stuff like within certain periods. It's clear we're getting Super Street Fighter 6, dude. Like, that's gonna be on the horizon. As soon as Season 2 is done, 100% we're getting Super Street Fighter 6 with a giant overhaul of the new gameplay. They're gonna allow you to V shit in the air. They're gonna allow you to air drive impact, like, get fucking ready. But that's going to happen. And it'll have, like, a bunch of new stuff and elements and glitz and glam that'll make the game look a lot better. The funny thing about SF6 is that I think of it in my head and it's like, yeah, they're just not providing the content people want. Because everybody wants content. We want more, is what people are saying. Let's actually look. Like, no shit. Because in my head, it's like, yeah, they're just not doing enough. And then I start actually thinking, and I'm like, wow. Let's start from the beginning of the year. Akuma, crossover stuff, okay. Ed stuff happened earlier this year as well, right? You got some fighting paths shit. Okay, who gives a shit? And then there was the Mega Man thing. Okay, who gives a shit? Akuma, yay! Content. And then Monster Hunter, yeah, who gives a shit? It's just the customization bullshit. And then we get to the raid bosses. They released multiple raid bosses this year. And that might not be content that I think everybody remembers happened, but they literally had elements in the game that were like, where no kidding, you like fight a raid boss, which was really cool. The giant attack, thank you. There it is. The giant attack event trailer, which was from a while ago. Pretty significantly cool update. Granted, how much will you engage with it? Well, it lasts like a little while and you get a free costume, which is great. You get free colors. You don't get those all the time. But that's something. right? And then soon after that, Bison, new trailer, more Fight Pass. Who gives a shit about Fight Pass? Bison comes out, and then they have a Bison, what's it called? They have a Bison Giant Attack as well. The Giant Attack happens. You can actually play as Giant Attack Bison. You can actually play as Giant Attack Akuma if you want to mess around. Like, they are playable through, like, technically secrets. So that also happened. That was also a thing that happened. And then they are still releasing shit, like some more summer passes and bullshit. And then Terrence is here. And then Terrence is out. And he gets his own stage. This is all this year, by the way. It's not last year. Sorry, not this year. Last year, 2024. I'll shut the hell up. And then there's a Darkstalkers thing. Who gives a shit? It's stuff that we don't give a shit about. And then Geese gets a thing. Who gives a shit? It's stuff we don't give a shit about. And then there's a holiday thing that happens. But who gives a shit? And then the latest one that set everybody off is that, like, this shit. Who wants this shit? Who gives a shit? Yeah, I get it. I get it. I am not defending this as in, this is what I want. It's not, dude. Like, I did not engage with the majority of this shit, but there is a lot. To say that they're, like, not working on stuff is absolutely disingenuous, because outside of the character releases that happened last year, there's a shit ton of stuff. Like, there's actually a shit ton of stuff. I think what we're dealing with is that we might not be the target demographic for all of it. I think the things that I like the most this year, outside of the characters themselves, was the Giant Attack shit. And I think the Giant Attack stuff was awesome. Like, a lot of folks in the fighting game community are gonna feel like they are 95% of the audience, but I'm gonna be real, they know you're gonna play the game. That's not the goal. That historically has been kind of a problem that fighting games have had. If you effectively have, like, a core audience and some of them will go away, yes, that is the nature of fighting games. Some people will want to go back to older games and that kind of shit, but I have to, like, told people about this in Guilty Gear Strive before that game was even out. They don't want to get rid of you, but you are effectively not the goal. When you make a new fighting game, the whole point is that you want to replace an existing audience 2 to 1, right? For every one person that is out of here, I'm fucking out of here. This shit is not for me. This shit big sucks. Peace. The goal is that you have been replaced by 2 people that are really into this shit that didn't even know it existed before or had no clue about it. And that's kind of worked. To be honest, for Street Fighter 6. I don't think you have to like it. I'm not saying about that. And I was absolutely one of the people that got a massive amount of shit for talking about what I felt about Guilty Gear Strive and how it was changing so much from previous games and all that kind of shit. But yes, that game was very polarizing and it was fun. And I think it is great. And I do not blame the devs for doing that, because guess what? It worked. Game appealed to a much bigger audience, and I think that's better than just appealing only to what I want, because there's a lot of other fucking fighting games I'll play, dude. There's a lot of other stuff that I could really enjoy and like. I don't think everything needs to appeal just to my needs, you know? I still think there's room for improvement. I still think that there should be space where this could be like 50-50, you know? This could possibly be split up between not just these costumes. I think maybe like half of the year can be dedicated to that type of stuff and half of the other year can be dedicated to people that just want to grind ranked. Because they did say that the ranked costumes were successful. Yeah, all right, I'm with you. Right now, they're trying something different. And this is different than what Street Fighter 5 had done, different than Street Fighter 4 had done, which the content in those games almost exclusively applied to people only playing the game online in ranked matches, you know? 1 outfit per year is your main and it isn't a huge ask. I agree. No, I'm be honest with you, I agree, dude. All I'll say is that it's funny to me. The very vocal fighting game community for Street Fighter exclusively is screaming, we want more. We want more, where is it? And it just isn't showing up. And that's understandable. All I can tell you is that when the costumes were first revealed, they were not universally accepted for a variety of reasons, for pricing reasons. But a reminder, when that shit came out, everybody and their mother, including me, made videos criticizing those costumes because of the costume pricing and the bundling. I think we forget that everyone complained about that when it happened, and Capcom's probably trying to find a way to budget their costumes that are very expensive and very long to make because people are clearly not into it. But right now we're screaming for more. Communities for games really scream for things in many situations when you don't have it. And it isn't always the community's fault because the way the devs handle it isn't always the best response. Another perfect example of this is Tekken 7. The entirety of Tekken 7's existence, dude, was screaming at the top of their lungs about, A, why the hell do we not have more cosmetics? Where's our extra costumes? And you only got character DLC for the most part and a bowling mode. That was it. That happens in Tekken 8, and it becomes the blight of Tekken 8, weirdly enough. It is also because of the way the developers handle it. This isn't ultimately a response of the players requesting something. The issue is that the messaging in between can get really screwed up. And again, Tekken 8 is definitely selling that stuff and it's working for them. It 100% is working for them. Outside of the initial outcry of that costume stuff that happened, it seemed like it eventually like lulled back down, and it's definitely selling for the most part because almost every single person I run into in ranked has that shit. When players and devs are having to listen to each other, or to listen to one side of just like what did they want, and they try to meet that demand, and that demand is met with like a ridiculous amount of ire, either at the result of a bad call from their end in terms of pricing or all this kind of stuff, it's usually not met with let's just do it again. You would think that it would be easy just to communicate those things, but a lot of the hive mind of everybody saying, hey, we want shit or we hate shit, usually just leaves that impression, and then they either peace out or they try to respond with like one thing, and it turns out the thing that they respond with isn't actually what you want. That's tough, which is why I don't, they have not struck a good balance with it in Tekken 8 or Tekken 7, and or Street Fighter 6, and it's clear that fighting games have a content issue, straight up. It's just the nature of it, the price it takes to create characters and to create content in fighting games does not directly match the return when it comes to producing this content and how much time it takes. The big difference is that most of these big budget fighting games like MK1, Street Fighter 6, these games are not multi-platform. They don't run on like a toaster. No, they require like next generation hardware. They're very expensive to make. The characters are extremely complicated, and making costumes for said characters can be extremely complicated. Sometimes it's just, is it worth it? Like, is it worth it to produce this stuff? And we have not really found a fighting game that's able to do that. You know, maybe, just maybe, 2XKO will, because it's actually a games as a service game. You know, it's free. To me, that's like one of the critical parts of a games as a service title that's going to be continually engaging people like Marvel Rivals is right now. It's free, dude. You're not paying for anything out the get-go. You're just going to make the choice of buying costumes and shit. That's a lot different than all the existing fighting games that are out there right now, because none of the existing fighting games that are out there right now that are relatively big have gone that full gas route, where it's just like, hey, we're going to create a core gameplay loop that is so intriguing that you're going to want to buy $15 to $20 costumes. Like, you're really going to want to do it. I'd like to say multiverses, sure, but multiverses history is such a fumbled bag of just crazy shit and going down. And to be honest, multiverses tried and it worked at the start. And as I understand, its DLC that it had was ridiculously successful, but they were not ready, and the fall off really screwed that game over. So it's a much different scenario, you know? It's tough. You got these fighting games that are trying to be games as a service, and they feel like they are, but they're actually not. You know, are they actually totally games as a service? People want Marvel Rivals level costumes out of games like Street Fighter 6 and stuff like that. And it's like, it isn't exactly like that. They're closer to something like a Monster Hunter, which is, in all honesty, where the developers actually have history. The same thing goes with Bandai Namco. Their entire history with some of these games is more tied to seasonal pass models and releasing some small things every once in a while in there. Yeah, they're not monetizing like a gas. They're not. And to be honest, chat, if this shit was monetizing like a games as a service, those costumes would not be $6 each. If Street Fighter 6 or Tekken 8 were actually free-to-play games, those costumes individually would be upwards of $15 to $20 each. And there would likely be no bundles. You'd be very lucky if there was bundles. So these are very different situations. I think what has changed is that all big multiplayer games now are mostly games as a service. They're all gas games. The way people are engaging with those games are based on that. We're kind of expecting fighting games to do the same thing, but none of the developers are ready for it. Like none of them. Any of the devs that are big fighting game devs have ever produced a fighting game like that. NRS has never done it. Capcom's never done it. Bandai Namco's never done it. At least with like any of their big franchises, they just don't operate that way, dude. So to be like, hey, they need to start operating that way, it's like, well, it might be a while. Which is why I'm very curious what the hell Virtua Fighter is.